Hello and welcome to the OnFraud podcast, where we talk about the latest fraud news, insights, and trends related to the world of identity. Hi, I'm Dimi, and I work at OnFido as a senior document specialist looking at trends and patterns in fraud, and I'm joined together by my colleague Simon. And today's podcast will be talking about something very topical. What is happening with the way that we interact with services in a digital environment now that everyone's stuck at home?
Exactly. Yes, things have certainly changed a lot since the last time we were broadcasting.
I think so. I think everyone's still getting to grips with it. I've seen a lot of content around how to keep motivated and stay yourself. And
Yeah, how to keep
uh,
sane, not burn out, making sure that you actually make a decent break between work and life and everything else.
of course, it's challenging. It's interesting to see how people are going to come out of it and what is this going to change for us going forward. One
Mm.
thing I'm thinking of is all of the financial transactions that have been going on as a result of the stock volatility. So, like, there've been a lot of
Yeah,
trading going on, and that's just one aspect of it. I'm sure there are many more types of trades and transactions that aren't stopping just because um, people are having to work from home.
yeah. It's a crazy time for that. I mean, everything that's happened has obviously made the markets really volatile, and I know you like to sort of have a little dip in there. So it's
Yeah, not only is it like a different landscape week to week, but also you have new stuff happening all over. Like, for example, just recently the crude oil barrel dropped below zero. The technically you could get paid to buy the future for a barrel of oil for $40,
wow.
which was amazing. That happened. That just happened for the first time in, I can't remember, like 60 years at least, or something like that.
Well,
But
certainly outside of our lifetimes.
yeah, so that was crazy, and all of these things that are happening all mean that, well, like, the world is changing. We're going to have to deal with this now.
Mm.
Um,
But yeah, I mean, as you say, things have definitely changed. I mean, it's not just in the areas that we've talked about there, but obviously much closer to home with the work we're doing. We've seen a lot of changes happen recently, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we're based in the UK, and we have this social distancing and
Hmm.
quarantine procedures in place. But life still goes on. People still need to access
Exactly.
medicine. They still need to access their bank accounts in the event that they're receiving funds, so that they can pay bills, etc.
Well, I was going to say now a lot of places are trying to stop. Well, not trying to stop, but they're more inclined towards they're trying to look for contactless payment or payment by card, all of which requires that you have a bank account. So if you haven't been able to open a bank account prior to this, you now find yourself in a situation where it's certainly preferential to have one. And how are you going to do that? So it's driving a lot more traffic through industries like our own.
Yeah, totally. That is happening. Our own industry of remote onboarding has seen a huge increase in demand because a lot more people are now forced to be remote, and then we have more people, like, volumes increasing. But at the same time, we see a trend of adopters where new
Yeah,
types of businesses are now forced to take the digitization strategy they maybe have postponed or overlooked for a while very, very seriously, because that is
yeah.
now the only medium they can use to access their customers and their user bases.
Exactly. This is what I was going to say. It's exactly that scenario. Before you had people that were maybe a bit reticent or thought it wasn't a model that would suit them, or maybe they were just starting to think about it and dip their toe in. And everything that's happened has just fast forwarded all of that. It's basically pushed everything to one side, and now it has to be the priority is to make sure that you can still run. And if before you were looking at face to face transactions. Um, you can't really consider those anymore. Certainly not in any of the countries that are locked down to the same extent the UK is, for example.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to look at what other countries are doing in this
Mm.
context. For example, I was reading about Switzerland, I believe, where the other day, and
All
in
right.
Switzerland, they've had some programs from the early 2000s that were trying to get digital signatures accepted as legally binding or equivalent of wet ink signatures and so on. And
Yeah, I think I'd seen something about that. Yes, yeah, yeah.
their project was coming to the beginning of implementation, I think about a year ago, when it hit some
Hmm.
unexpected roadblocks. But just now, not very just a couple of months ago, by public request, they've forced a referendum to look at digital identity as a
Yeah.
whole for the entire of Switzerland, and how people access their government schemes, the social services, the financial services, etc., etc.
Mm.
So it's nice to see that some places are taking this very, very seriously, and they're using this momentum to draw the line, put some legislations in place, and at least start putting frameworks together.
It's never going to be. It's never going to be as poignant as it is at this point. I think if you aren't looking to try and adopt this or get on board with this, you're really going to struggle. I mean, no one can say for certain how long the lockdown's going to last for. This is essentially the way it is, certainly for the time being, and until until it just isn't anymore. But I think the point is, now that it's happened, there's there's no real incentive to go back. If you can prove that the model works under the new conditions that we're all living in, where everything's on lockdown and you can't do face to face, everything has to be done remotely, then once you've proven that model works, it's, I think I've used this phrase before, but it's Pandora's box is open. You can't put it back in. Where's the incentive, or where's the argument for going back to a model that you've already proved you can live without? It's opening up so many avenues. It's crazy.
Yeah, I think first of all, the precedent is a huge factor, where
Mm,
once you've proven that it works and the parameters that it works to, unless you can have a meaningful impact by forcing interactions to be face to face, i.e., let's
mm,
say you improve the acquisition of your genuine customers by whatever percent that offsets the drop
yeah,
off that they have to go through for having to be there physically in person. Yeah, maybe that makes sense, but that
mm,
will all be driven by the data of each specific sector. However, I doubt any sector at all will have a higher fraud loss than they would have a drop off loss because
yeah,
of lack of digital onboarding strategies.
yeah. I
And
agree.
it's to all of these adopters that we want to highlight the fact that there are multiple strategies you can adopt, and
Yeah,
you should be taking all of these into consideration as much as you can.
exactly. That's it. There's no one silver bullet for for the way of doing this. There are multiple different ways you can do it. Exactly. Yeah. No. It really is quite an interesting time, certainly from where we're sitting. I think anyway. It'll be interesting to see what comes after. But like I say, I think we've just we've just seen a precipice and we're over it. You know. That made it
Yeah.
sound quite ominous. I didn't mean it to sound like that, but I think it's actually right. Let's go. We're sitting on the top of a wave. Let's say that.
Yeah, anyone's guess is as good as mine. But yeah, to be honest, I think it's actually also a great opportunity, because now the kind of the everyone's been forced to take this out of the box thinking and disaster approach, and
Mm.
to business continuity. I think some brilliant ideas have come out, and some great implementations will become standardized, which is really good for the whole industry. And yeah.
Yeah, well, in society at large, I think any of these step forwards, it's always a time of crisis. The phrase that gets used is necessity is the mother of invention. And I think we're seeing so much of that across the board in so many different walks of life at the moment. But yeah, it's but at the same time, with all of this in mind, uh, whenever you've got the goods, whenever you've got the positivity, I can't help it. It's the way my mind works. At the same time, I think, okay, with this always comes hand in hand the heightened risk. As long as there is a positive thing going on, there's always going to be someone in the background who's looking at this going, what's the way in? How can I benefit from this? That kind of thing. So it's interesting to see what's going to come out of this. It's also interesting to see what kind of new waves of fraud we're going to see as a result of this, or what ingenious methods people are going to try and invent or engage with to try and circumvent whatever comes out in regards to online security.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm also curious what's going to happen.
Mm.
It's interesting to consider that there already are a lot of tools at our arsenal that we can use to have a risk-based approach to identification. We can do credit searches. You can do
Hmm.
biometric matches.
Yep.
You can do document verification. Also, all forms of other types of biometrics and signatures and so on and so forward. But which one's the best strategy to adopt at which point in a user interaction, and how frequently does it happen? How do you manage that? Because
Mm.
when you, let's say, run an advert on television and you expect people to download the app and on board, maybe you'll give them a freebie. That's when you're expecting people to sign up. So in their sign up
Yeah.
process, you want that to be as quick as possible, ideally a single line, and that's it. After the sign up process, that's when other kinds of other levels or other requirements step in, and that's when you have to look at, like we were talking earlier, how do you layer these counter fraud
Yeah.
elements? 'Cause
Well,
everyone's
this
trying
is
to
it.
abuse it.
Yeah, well, as we've discussed numerous times before, we're both very much aware, it's that whole onboarding process, that sweetener or incentive that you're using to get people on board. That's entirely the point where you're going to get, in all likelihood, hit the worst. That's when your fraudsters are going to try and get in. You're drawing attention to the fact that there's something to be gained for very little effort, and that's when your fraudsters most likely to try and attack. If you're on a quiet, non-promotional period, then you're less attractive than the company that is offering a promotion because it's something for nothing.
Yeah, and there's definitely a pattern there where we see a
Mm.
specific type of fraud spiking during promotional periods
Yep.
with our customers, where it's repeat attacks and usually using pretty primitive, rudimentary types
Yeah, well,
of fraud,
it's that
and
idea of
it's
throwing enough mud at a wall. Eventually, some of it will stick, isn't it? Really, it's I don't
yeah.
have to be brilliant. I just have to find which service isn't protected against this very easy and mass-produced fraud. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a sieve in the end, right?
Mm.
And for example, let's say someone runs a bonus of like $10 or £10. That's not a super large amount, but what fraudsters would try and do is they try and repeatedly attack the same
Exactly.
system
Yeah.
multiple
Multiple.
times,
Yeah.
so that the $10 or pounds or whatever stack up 10,
Mm.
20, 50 times. And when they cash out, it's going to be a significant loss to the company running the bonus. But there are strategies you can use to avoid that happening. For example, you can run deduplication algorithms
Yeah.
to try and figure out that it's the same request or the same very, very similar type of request is coming from a very similar device or profile or whatever.
Well,
Uh,
we had that case, didn't we, with one applicant who basically was doing like 300 attempts a day, but just by changing the surname and the document number. And I think that was all he was changing. Same photo, same document, but he just changed a couple of the personal, the PII details, and then was spamming systems like 300 attacks a day,
yeah,
every day in a week. That's professional, but you've got to admire the scattergun approach. I mean, I don't know if that's what you call a scattergun or just a tidal wave, really. 300 a day, 7 days a week. It's astonishing.
yeah, and just like we're stuck at home and many of us can be bored or running out of things to do. Maybe some people are running out of options, and that they're at the end of what they can reasonably do for themselves, and crime is
Yeah,
the
no,
only thing that they can do to support themselves and their family.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I mean, it's inevitable. It's not a surprise. It's just it's the consequence of what's happening. Definitely. I mean, there's going to be equally while there's been some people that have been doing well, just like we've been saying. There's going to be a lot of people that have found this a lot harder, and there's always a percentage of people. Once things have got harder, they will become more and more desperate, and they will start to look at these less legitimate means. I think that's just common sense, really. That's bound to happen. Um, but I think it's worth having a look at some of the solutions. I mean, obviously we've got solutions where you've got onboarding a bit like ours, or a bit like the services we offer, where you've got like a document in still examination, and you've got like an upload of a selfie or maybe a live capture video as well. But what I found interesting is before all this was happening, we were starting to see more and more suggestions that maybe the document verification, or indeed the face-to-face, should be done in some live, almost like a video interview or a video call. And I think that's something we should probably have a little chat about. I mean, it's the merits of that. I I don't think you're gaining quite as much from doing it. I know it's supposed to be kind of like the equivalent of like a face-to-face examination that you would get maybe on the borders. I know some of the suggestions I've seen or the ideas that have been put forward is kind of emulating what a border guard would do when you arrive. But I don't think that works in a remote environment in the same way. I don't think it translates quite as well. Video, for me, I don't think gives you the level of detail that you need.
Yeah, I think that that's a brilliant point to mention. As we're moving more online and fewer people or manual processes can interact with users, that when you have a more, let's say, frictionful or challenge and response based approach, where you have
Yeah,
an interview with someone that you have to schedule and both people have to be online at the same time, that takes a lot of effort. So
yeah,
what I think is important is to quantify the level of effort that goes into this versus the return that you
mm,
get from it, because maybe this level of scrutiny for onboarding when you want someone to go through a video interview might be more robust to certain types of fraud. Yeah, that could be the case.
yeah,
However, maybe the cost of onboarding a user, because it takes a while to schedule the interview and you can
yeah,
transact only at a later point in time, maybe that cost is greater for a business than the higher assurance that you could get through video. But then the challenge of like the assurance of video is another topic altogether. Well,
yeah.
I'm not
But this
trying
is what
to
I mean.
knock the
It's
solution.
no. But I think it's kind of you're right. I think it's for me the whole idea of doing like a one-to-one video kind of interview type session. Uh, it's not scalable. It's incredibly costly when you actually think about it,
I
and
think
that's my
I
opinion
think
anyway. But
cost aspect aside, we can look at the cost aspect maybe slightly differently. I think one very important aspect to stop on is the training aspect, which you mentioned.
definitely,
And this is something that, like, I mean, you can speak a lot more about, because you have
mm,
your experience working exactly in the capacity that you were describing as
mm,
a person in the airport, greeting people on arrival,
yep,
asking to see their documents and interviewing them, and so on. As a professional in that field, and as document specialists, we know that a huge amount of this kind of interaction
mm,
relies on certain cues that you just cannot get in a video.
no,
So that substituting the face-to-face interaction with a video kind of defeats the purpose of the
exactly.
face-to-face. It's not so that you can see the person and talk to them per se. I mean, that is one of the aspects, but there are multiple aspects which go into this, and that's something that you can maybe like kind of like highlight. What would a border guard do when doing that? And like, it's a
Oh
very
yeah,
complex process.
yeah. I mean, not to put aside or forget about the importance of a face to face if you're in a border control environment, because you do gain a lot from body language, but it's because of the fact that you have got a person standing in front of you. Person, as we talked about before, it's a lot easier if you're going to try and commit fraud if you're not in situ. So it's almost like the newsreader effect of you're only going to see this much of me, therefore I only have to worry about this much. You're only going to see my top half, therefore I dress professionally for the top half, but you're not seeing my bottom half. When you're doing a video interview, I think a lot of the tools that you would use in a face-to-face physical interview or examination is out the window, and therefore the merits of using face-to-face, so the merits of using a video call in particular, is kind of lost. The whole point of doing it is, you're missing that physical interaction, the fact that you're in the same place, the fact that you can look someone right in the eye, and instead you're not. You're looking down a camera. It doesn't have the same effect. It doesn't at all. I think anyone who says it does is fooling themselves, to be perfectly honest. Um, but then, if we're talking about the actual examination of the document, um, I think relying on someone to interact specifically in a live environment the way you want them to is a lot more taxing on the time of the person that's doing the examination than you necessarily want.
Do you know?
If
I'm
Go on.
thinking about. I was trying to get a video call with my grandparents over the weekend, and
Yes,
like
this is
it
exactly what
took
I'm
me
talking
an
about.
hour
Exactly.
before the day to set up all the
Yep.
software with my parents, and then
Yep.
on the day it still took me half an hour
And
before they could see me on the screen, and
and
that's
that's
just
no
video. That's not a
and
picture of
that's
a document.
no, this is it, and that's no detriment to any family members who might be listening or involved. Dimi loves you very much, but it's more the point. It's exactly that though. It's this kind of when you're trying to take someone through the process the first time and they're not familiar with it, maybe because they're not familiar with your system, or maybe they're just not as tech savvy as some people are. You don't want to be excluding those people. Their business is just as valid or as valuable as anybody else's. But at the same time, they're going to need a lot more work and requirement. And some people, it doesn't matter how well you might be as a communicator, some people are not very receptive to instructions and they're going to struggle. And as you say, just trying to set up the simple thing, well, what would be simple for most people, and I'm sure most people listen to this, the idea of video call, very straightforward. The idea of installing the app that gets you the video call and then doing all of the setup and the registration that's required for some of these, probably again, fairly straightforward for most people, but the percentage is starting to drop. Now, if we're talking about, getting a particular item, i.e. An identity document, holding it the right way towards a webcam or holding it the right way, with some kind of selfie cam, listening to instructions by a professional who knows what they're trying to look at, or at least they should be if we're talking like high-end expert or someone of equivalent level to a professional in the field who's got the experience, got the knowledge that they can do this thing, remotely on video. It's still quite a difficult scenario. It's not easy by any means. It's going to be very, very time consuming. And then I think you're not getting the most out of the time that you've got that examiner for. If they're spending their time trying to, so it's almost like you kind of want someone to pre-record the video and then edit the video so that the examiner literally just sees the bit they need and then they can move on. That's the most cost effective way to use your examiner. But that then isn't, it's I think it's diminishing returns really when you're looking at that kind of scenario.
I think you're touching on a very interesting point here, and that's the trade-off between the type of, let's say, the type of interviewer or that is trained and capable to do a remote like identity vetting, and
Yeah,
that pool is, I would assume, quite small because that
yeah.
requires a very sophisticated type of skills and a lot of training and experience. So,
But you'd
like,
be going around headhunting border guards in all of these different countries, and I'm
yeah.
sure that's going to be met with a level of aggression by government eventually because you can't keep stealing all the border guards. Thank you very much.
So like you have a ceiling in the total capacity of checks that you could get for
Yep.
all of these people, assuming you get all of the border guards in all of the world. There's still
Mm.
like a limited number. They still have a limited ceiling of work hours a week, and if
Yep.
you, let's say, you want to open a bank account over a weekend or in your own free time after you get home from work, or you want to interact outside of working hours, maybe that then you need to think about extra capacity for
Hmm.
that interviewer, so that you can cover 24/7 or at least longer shifts or weekends or whatever, and then the number of people that you need to get increases exponentially. So you,
Mm.
as you mentioned, like you quickly get to the point where you realize, hold on, we don't have enough people so that we
Exactly.
can
To
do
make
the
this
video interviews for everyone, to the
every
point
single
that it
individual.
makes sense. So,
Yes. Exactly.
so what are we doing the video interview for? Where there are
Exactly.
different elements that we're trying to get through, right?
Mm. Well, this is what I mean. It's and again, I come back to something that I touched upon earlier. I would argue that we're not actually gaining a lot by trying to, for example, look at a document through a live video call. I don't think you're getting as much from that as you are in asking someone or using an automated application that walks someone through step by step and then forces them to take a still photo that's going to be a better quality. There's going to be less movement, less blurring. We're going to have better detail, which is essential for doing this type of examination. We have the opportunity to reject stuff that doesn't meet the grade as well without wasting anybody's, a significant amount of anybody's time. You can incorporate a lot of machine learned models, which will speed up the service as well. Using that automation can, improve things quite a lot. And I think if you're looking at a live video call, you're leaving too much to the human interaction. As we all know, we're all quite fallible. You know.
Yeah, I think this is actually a brilliant point. Where now we 100 years ago, uh,
Mm.
um, when we had the industrial revolution, people were transitioning from craftsmen and marksmen,
Yeah,
marksmen,
manual artisans and that thing. Yeah.
artisans and masters in a specific trade, and they are
Mm.
transitioning into a mass-produced environment where the same kind of good or commodity were being produced at a scale. So I think the
Yeah,
same thing is happening exactly now, where
I
we're
totally agree. Yeah.
the ability to vet a person is maybe in the last 10 or 15 years going digital. Previously, you'd have a solicitor that would check you, or a person that would vet you for any kind of interaction that you would need, like the post office, or whatever. But since the advent of the internet, these people that would go and investigate you and make sure that you are who you say you are and interview your friends and family now have to do the same thing in an online environment. So you need to
Well,
take
I
what
think
is, yeah.
well, so I think even from that we've improved quite a bit. I mean, when you have a solicitor verified document, what you've actually got is a verified copy, and all that essentially is. And I think a lot of people overlook this point. When a solicitor verifies a copy of a document, they haven't authenticated the document. There's very, very few solicitors. You could probably count them on two hands, maybe one of your feet, depending on how well you cope with your digits. But there's very, very few of them in existence that are trained document examiners to the same extent. Most of the time, all they're doing is just simply certifying that what they've seen is a true and accurate copy of the document that was presented to them. They haven't authenticated it. They've just said, "Yeah, this is a true likeness." You know, it's
Yeah,
like someone saying, "Yeah, this is definitely the guy I recognise." Do you know his name? No, not particularly, but I can tell you that's definitely the guy I saw earlier. He told me his name was, Jeff Sullivan. Um, Therefore, as far as I know, he's Jeff Sullivan. That's what he told me his name was. And it's the same idea. It's just getting someone to verify that something is a true and genuine copy is not the same as them authenticating it as the definite genuine article.
I think that's exactly how I would define the difference between credit record
Mm.
or database and a government database, where the credit
Yes.
record database would be a copy of someone having a financial transaction with those details, while a
Yes.
government database entry would be a government issued token to say this is the identity of a person.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree on that point. And going back to like the automation, as you said, using machine learning models, I think
Mm.
again drawing a parallel to the industrial revolution, what you want to do is take each component or each step of the process that would be like
Yep.
the art of inspecting a document, for example, and you want to break it down into automatable processes. And we already know that there are some automation processes which computers do better than humans. For example, counting, calculus, algebra, etc. Um,
Or algorithms on certain specific check digits, that kind of thing, those kind of calculations, they can be done much quicker.
what's interesting is we've also reached parity with facial recognition. So computers are now
Yeah.
as good or better than humans at matching two faces. So why do
I
you
never
need a
thought we'd be able to say that statement. I've got to be honest. It's a very bold statement. But yes, I think you're right. I think we're at that point now. We're just at tipping point now.
Yeah, like I think we are at parity. So why
Mm.
do you necessarily need a border guard to confirm for or the same type of interaction to confirm that the person in the document is the same person as the person holding the document? You don't
Mm.
need to do that in the same way that you previously would by asking a human to compare the faces, because you
Exactly.
now have other
But,
technologies.
but I mean, if we talk about sort of again sort of these ideas of video interviews, one of the things that I keep hearing about is well, we've got to verify the hologram, and hologram's a very important security feature. The hologram is a security feature. I think anyone who's an expert, in document examination will tell you that yeah, it's good, but unless you're going to magnify it and look at it at a microscopic level, there are some ridiculously good counterfeits out there, and you can't base your whole examination on one security feature. I mean, I've always told people when we've done when we've done examination training that don't get caught with what we call the magpie effect. Obviously, the magpie being a bird that's attracted to shiny objects, the hologram or things like optically variable ink. They're not impossible to counterfeit to a sufficient degree that would fool most people, or even repurpose from a genuine item. And yet we've got so many people now. I don't know. I don't know if they have a vested interest in sort of setting up some kind of video interview or something, but they seem to think that everything should hang on the presence or verification of the hologram. And I think, the kind of things that you and I have done where we've been going around talking to the actual manufacturers and suggesting they come up with something that works better in an online environment. I think that's a much more interesting concept than trying to shoehorn in stuff that works in a face-to-face environment into online verification, when even some of the manufacturers of these holographic devices have turned around and said it doesn't work like that. You can't verify our items successfully via video, and that's coming from manufacturers. You have to listen to the people that know their products.
Yeah, but at the same time, video technology is evolving very quickly. The cameras that we have, the sensors are getting better and better. We're putting more and more cameras in each device, so that
Yeah, of course.
you never know. Maybe at a certain point in time, we'll reach a technological point where everyone would have a device or a series of devices that could record you from multiple angles and would record the entire room like a hologram. So that could be analyzed by an expert in a different type of interaction.
Okay, yeah, look,
But like
if we can start, well,
that's like future technology. But for
yeah,
now,
of course,
we're limited with what we have, and we're limited by
exactly.
the classic less than 1.3 megapixel webcam that people have,
Yep.
and that's like your first sieve. You're seeing everything through that one lens,
Yeah,
which is low quality,
exactly.
low resolution. And from that point on, what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
And whatever you're trying to do, I think for for the purpose of risk assurance, go ahead and do it. But think about the best, or whether you could achieve the same result by doing something else.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
essentially product thinking. Think about the problem space rather than the solution space.
Exactly. I've again, this is something that we've seen before. I'm not going to sit here and pull apart various different sort of security features or things that have been introduced into travel documents, but you do see this quite a lot where people get so focused on the idea of one solution and how they can kind of tweak and improve and modify, and then they've realized it's not quite secure enough, so then they build more things onto it. Then it's not quite user friendly enough, so they build more onto it again. Then someone else thinks of a slightly different use case which would be nice if you could do it. Constantly building and building and building because they're they're too focused on the one solution rather than, like you say, looking at the problem and coming up with some fresh thinking. It doesn't always have to be the same approach. And the answer isn't always to build on top of your house. Sometimes the answer is to go and find a new plot of land and build a different building altogether.
Yeah, I think in product terms they call this being in love with your product.
Yeah, but this is one of the things I hope that we that we are not. I always try and look at things as objectively as possible and sort of say, well, what's the most secure way? If someone attacks it in a new way, I welcome that, because then it opens your mind to a different way of dealing with a situation or dealing with a problem. You come up with a different solution because you're forced to. Again, it's coming back to this thing we talked about at the beginning of necessity being the mother of invention. It's I think it's interesting and challenging, but I think if you get too caught up with one solution, then you're going to end up getting left behind when people outthink you.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's a challenging time. People are
Mm.
having to do things differently compared to before, differently to ever. Sometimes for the first time, and this is coming up with old challenges reappearing, such as like we've said, when people are running campaigns now to get
Yep.
visibility, you get bonus abuse in gambling. The same type of bonus abuse, or almost the
Yeah.
same MO, is happening now for any company running a campaign. So that's a
Mm.
reoccurrence of an old friend, so to speak. But at the same time, you will have new types of fraud, as fraud will likely increase because the social and the financial factors will be much more difficult for
Mm.
for a large number of people.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. But that's it. It's strange times. We shall see what happens. I'm quite. I'm kind of very optimistic. I've got to be honest, but I'm looking forward to the fresh challenges. Got to be honest about that too.
I think we're going to pull through in a way that we haven't had to before, and I hope that this will make us slightly better as humans. Anyway, I can still hope.
that is truly optimistic. There, I like that one. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Dimi. I've enjoyed today. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone who's been listening has enjoyed that as well. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. This podcast was produced by OnFraud. If you're interested in learning more about fraud, or indeed what Dimi and I do and what we're doing to combat fraud, head to OnFraud's website. That's onfraud.com. And you can also follow OnFraud on LinkedIn or Twitter. But once again, Dimi, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation today. It's always good to catch up with you, my friend.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure to just rant on.
Yeah, we let it loose today.
All right.
We hope that you'll be listening in again next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye for now.